You start by smelling the stale dust and feeling the sensation of being trapped, your body and limbs encased in stone. You push against the darkness until the rock cracks and crumbles off your skin, the light spills in, and you stumble out, not into a tavern or a king's court, but onto a crumbling platform and looking upon an infinite abyss of stone, vertical towers, and moss. You have no memory, no name, and no history. You're just a small, fragile thing standing in the silent shadow of a megastructure that has long forgotten its creators. Your pack contains little more than a few scavenged oddments, a small knife, some root fruit, perhaps a sprig of some unknown plant. Far more dangerous are the fragments rattling around in your mind, broken whispers of a flowering tower or a crooked stairwell that acts as your only clues to this infinite labyrinth. These secrets do not form a map, but a promise, overriding fear and hunger with a single consuming command: to go, to witness, and to explore. Eternal Ruins is a tabletop RPG based on the world-building experiment of Sam Carr. That world has unfolded as a series of enchantingly illustrated lore videos on YouTube, as well as a Patreon where further artwork, lore, and world exploration has been posted, but after 4 years has blossomed into a game published by MythWorks. MythWorks has tapped Felix and Rob Leigh to write this game, and it uses the same underlying system that Felix used for WildSea, which was also published by MythWorks. They called the system Wild Words. I think the most remarkable thing here is that these guys put out a free beta quick start thing, but it's a whopping 190 pages, almost fully illustrated and pretty polished, which is to say, I'll be able to show you a lot of the game in this video so that you can judge for yourself if it's something you want to help crowdfund or purchase depending on when you're watching this video. I'll leave links for everything below, including Sam's original YouTube channel and the cozy Discord server for Eternal Ruins. Let's jump in. I think this game is so specifically thematic and has such a distinct visual identity, it's really worth taking a glance at Sam's influences. At the top of his list is Ico, an old PlayStation classic in which you traverse ancient, massive, crumbling ruins and solve environmental puzzles amidst the decaying architecture. Zelda is also listed, and I'm not sure which one he means, but in virtually every Zelda game, you're exploring ruins at some point, and some Zeldas depict everyone as these sort of chibi toddler-looking people, which is exactly the aesthetic going on in Eternal Ruins. Hollow Knight is another one in this vein. There are also several Studio Ghibli films cited as inspiration, all of which contain strange spirits and demons, forces of nature, and relatively pacifist protagonists. I'll show you in this video how all of that actually manifests in the game. We can start with the core concepts. You're sort of trapped in endless ruins in this game. There's no outside world. There isn't even a memory of one. Your character wakes up with amnesia, you're born from stone, or rather, you're an ageless, childlike human who wakes up inside of a thin shell of a stone statue. If you don't die from disease, violence, or misadventure, your character will not age and will live forever. Right there, I think this game really starts to take on some strange dreamlike qualities. There are no towns or villages or really even any settlements. At most you'll run into another band of travelers, but more often than not it's a spirit here or a demon there. There is sustenance. One of my all-time favorite manga turned anime series is Dungeon Meshi, in which dungeon delvers are able to derive all their meals from the flora and fauna of a dungeon. Well, it's the same deal here. The ruins that you exist in are flourishing with stuff to eat, scavenge, and craft. And there are a lot of spirits and demons, and they manifest in a very Studio Ghibli way, if you know what I mean. They're sort of random looking and behave erratically. Another big concept in this setting is servitors, which is very strongly influenced from Ghibli's Castle in the Sky. These are automatons that come in all shapes and sizes and usually act as a sort of puzzle or challenge for players. You can't really destroy them with normal attacks, so you have to figure out a way to trick them or evade them if they're obstructing you. If you're not familiar with the mechanics of WildSea, Felix is really fond of tracks. You use tracks in all sorts of ways in this game. There are open tracks that everyone can see, hidden tracks that the players know about but only the GM can see, and secret tracks that only the GM knows about. You can fill some tracks multiple times and they sort of level up, and they can be used as clocks or countdown timers or whatever. As far as the dice, this is a D6 dice pool system. Every time you face a big challenge, one that is difficult, dangerous, or dramatic, you need to consult this list, basically. You can add d6s to your roll from the following. If you have an edge or special knack, that would apply to the challenge. Another die or two if you have a skill that would apply. If you have a character aspect that would apply, that's another die. A physical relic that would apply adds another. And finally, you can add 1d6 if you consume a special item, get help from a friend, or otherwise use the environment to help you. The max that you can roll is 6d6. I'll just tell you right now, from my listening to the official showcase playthrough of this game, I found that negotiating and sorting the dice for each roll can be a bit tedious. Just like with any game, it gets faster with practice, but there are some soft spots here that require a lot of consideration if a d6 can be added to the pool or not. As far as dice results, you are looking at your highest number rolled. That determines one of three outcomes: triumph, conflict or mixed success, and disaster. I feel like the word disaster is a bit harsh, but that's the word they go with here. And if you roll doubles, that outcome is exacerbated. Mixed successes are going to come up a lot in this game, and I think this sort of exhausts some GMs after a while. With mixed successes, the player is supposed to get what they want, but there's a drawback, or maybe they get something similar to what they want, but not quite what they were shooting for. This sort of constant ambiguity can really jam some people up. I don't have any problems with interpreting mixed successes, but one little homebrew I think I'd add to the dice mechanics here is to reward or punish triples and quadruples differently from rolling doubles. As the game is written here, rolling 4 6s, for example, would be treated the same as rolling 2 6s, a critical triumph. I'd want to amp that up a bit if there was a big roll. A roll can also be disadvantaged because of exceeding difficulty, shortage of time, or need of stealth. In those cases, the top 1 or 2, or even sometimes 3 highest dice in a roll are removed. Hope and despair are a bit of an odd duck. This is a track that is front and center on your character sheet and represents the game's meta currency. You gain hope and despair points along this single track from events in the ongoing story that you're telling. And anytime you as the player want to add a d6 to a roll, you can spend a point of hope if you have one. The weird part is, if you have points of despair, the GM can spend them to remove a d6 from a roll, activate an environmental penalty, or use a unique demon power if you're in the middle of an encounter with a demon. Which is to say, there is that adversarial GM point economy here that you see in some games, but those GM points are tracked on individual character sheets. So if the GM can't see the player's character sheets, they have to ask the player if they have despair, then act accordingly. It's a little awkward. It should also be mentioned that players can spend points of despair to activate some aspects that their character might have. This is interesting because it means that players can actively and intentionally deprive the GM of their meta points by spending despair at every chance they get. I mean, if we're going to get adversarial with the GM, we've got to use the tools we've got, right? I mentioned tracks earlier, but here's a solid example of what I mean by tracks being used for everything. When you meet an NPC, the GM might start a track for them that marks the progression of befriending them or getting them to acquiesce to something. Here we go, 4 more types of tracks right here. Challenge tracks will represent the sort of health of a hazard, like the hit points of a demon or the progress of a physical challenge, like climbing up the side of a temple or something. Then there are override tracks, which are specific to servitors. When you fill an override track of a servitor, it's sort of like hacking, but you can never really reprogram them. You just turn them off for a short while. Accord tracks are what I mentioned a minute ago with NPCs. They represent how much social progress you make with a threat. And this is a really big one in this game because you're very often not going to be fighting or brute forcing your way out of a problem in this game. I mean, just look at this list of 10 skills on your character sheet. I often say that the skills on a sheet will tell you what the game is wanting you to constantly do in the game. And if that's accurate, then Eternal Ruins is more about wiggling your way out of trouble than fighting your way out. Anyway, the final major kind of track is the countdown track, which is like a clock. Tracks for everything, it's great. And speaking of tracks, you take damage to any and all of your aspect and relic tracks, which is pretty interesting. So instead of a hit point pool that goes up and down, you have any number of character aspects and gear that take the damage. Some of these have really short tracks, like 1 or 2 boxes before they fill up, and others can be more durable. But when one of these tracks fills all the way up, then you can't apply that thing towards adding a d6 to a dice roll until you've repaired it somehow. When you take more damage than a track can absorb, the overspill goes into your fallout track. So in a way, you could think of aspects and relics as your armor, and fallout is your hit points. If your fallout track fills 4 times, your little guy is dead and you have to describe their final moments. The same goes for the curse track, which is filled by other means. If that fills 4 times, it's over for your character. I think one of the most remarkable things about this game is how it really forces players to think about the quality of both food and sleep while they are exploring. I don't want to get into the weeds here, so I'll just sort of summarize it. Basically, each day in-game is divided into 6 segments. There's no daylight or nighttime, but the day ends with the ring of a bell that can be heard everywhere in the ruins, and you're essentially following a 24-hour schedule. I think the bioluminescent moss everywhere creates a simulacrum of daylight or something, so there is light during the day. Anyway, at the end of each day, your party has to settle down and make camp. The location of where you end up for camp, as well as your camping gear, will determine if you get 1 tick of sleep for the night or 2. Likewise, the oddments and special abilities that you have will determine the kind of meal that you're able to make, and that will either mark 1 or 2 ticks of food for the night. If you fall short of the 2 ticks in either category, you have to roll for morale, and a failure on that will give you a point of despair as well as a curse point. Remember that curse points will add up to the point where you die. So basically, if you don't take quality sleep and good food seriously in terms of scouting a good camping spot and foraging enough for good food ingredients, you will slowly start to die. Camping is in fact 1/3 of this game's play experience. While camping, you will also have a little narrative encounter from time to time, if the GM wants one, but these are necessarily non-hostile in nature, which is to say, the camping phase of the game is a relatively safe and cozy segment of your day, although it's probably going to be a little stressful if you aren't meeting your sleep and food quotas. Camping is also where you'll do specific tasks such as, maybe most importantly, healing, as well as repairing your gear and your aspects. Remember, those are essentially your armor in this game, as well as avenues for adding d6s to rolls, so you need to make sure the tracks on those don't fill up. But you also have to consider crafting new, more useful items, and balance that against foraging for more little items. There's only so much time in a day, so you might end up having to make some hard decisions here. There are actually 8 so-called paths that you can choose from when creating a character. They all start with a choice of several edges, skills, gear, and ambiguous pieces of knowledge called fragments, then some modifications to one gauge or another. Importantly, depending on if you're starting as a new or a veteran character, you'll choose either 2 or 4 of these aspects. This is really what defines your path choice, since each of these has some special mechanic or another, and they can, of course, absorb incoming damage and protect your fallout track. There are very rare and powerful relics that you can find. This free quick start only has 7 listed, so I'm hoping to see a lot more in the final game. What you can do with these relics, if you're lucky enough to find one, is use your downtime to study them and unlock more powers. And the unlockable powers that each of these relics have can be really potent. For example, this coin can be given to someone in a trade, but will always reappear in your pocket in the next scene. So it's like infinite money. Well, except you'll probably leave a long trail of unhappy NPCs in your wake. This bell will immediately fill a servitor's override track, which can fast forward the story through a whole session's worth of trying to defeat or circumvent a servitor. There's a long, detailed, and very helpful section on how to actually run this game. One thing I thought was kind of interesting was how there's this whole spread on session 0 and safety tools, and a big list of triggers that you might want to avoid with certain sensitive players. But one thing you won't find on this list is the depiction of harm to children or humans that resemble children. And that's because every last PC in this game is a human that resembles a child, and there is necessarily harm, physical and spiritual, that will come to them. So I hope that's not on your list of personal lines and veils. Specifically, the kind of harm that your little toddler-like adventure will face comes in the form of increasingly severe blood loss, broken bones that can worsen to the point that you lie down and die, head trauma that can lead to total amnesia. There are also curses that make your limbs detach and scuttle away, where your body dissolves into mist, and where your own shadow stalks you and eventually eats you. This is what a creature description looks like, generally. Most notably, there is a challenge track for each creature, as well as an accord track, which you can try to fill in order to befriend or somehow woo the creature. You'll notice that there's actually a lot of written detail for a creature, and that's because anytime a game is trying to take you outside of just mindless, endless combat, you can't just describe a creature with a small block of numbers and a few short phrases for combat abilities. If a creature is meant to be meaningfully interacted with and possibly defeated by social means or through novel interactions, then descriptions are going to have to be a little wordier like this. There are minor and major spirits in the setting, which, as you might have guessed, act as quest givers and which reward you with blessings and pretty much anything the GM wants to reward you with. There are no rules written in this quick start for how to become a so-called spirit warden, but in the full game you'll be able to swear loyalty to a great spirit, and that will come with its own rewards and obligations. Great spirits are particularly fascinating because they're the source of information about the world, as well as missions and quests, and of huge rewards. The antithesis of spirits are demons, which also come in all shapes and sizes, and they are generally bad and trying to hurt you. But that being said, the first demon that is listed in this quick start is one that, quote, lacks even the slightest streak of malevolence. It's a demon that has lost all its keepers or thralls and has forgotten to be bad. But then of course you have bad ones that are big and scary. But again, check out that accord track. It would actually be slightly easier to trick or sweet talk your way out of an encounter with this one than to fight it. Alright, here are my thoughts on Eternal Ruins so far, based on this 190-page quick start. Cons: a bit claustrophobic. The entire world of this game transpires in a vast ruins that has no sunlight, no doors, no windows to the outside world. If you were to play in a campaign of this game extensively, I can't help but think that there might be a sense of confinement or claustrophobia that settles in. There's practically nothing stopping a GM from bursting the doors open to an outside world where spirits and demons and servitors could also be found, but that doesn't seem to be the intention of the creators, at least not yet. Chibi Kid's not for everyone. I think the whole reason this game exists is because enough people out there became smitten with Sam's world building and his lovely artwork, but his portrayal of the humans in the setting is very specifically a certain look, and that look is chubby Japanese style chubbos, for lack of a better term. And that's not for everyone. I guess you could take this game's framework and use a whole different artwork style, but then you'd be ignoring years of incredible illustrations. That being said, this game's rules and lore are not really tied to the chibi chubbo style of character. Nothing about the gear or aspects or relics or anything tells you that you have to look like a chubby 5-year-old with stump feet. Overwritten in spots. I appreciate that a lot of hazards and encounters need to be written with a certain volume of words in order to account for all the possible creative problem solving that players could engage in, but there were definitely spots where I thought some of the aspects of the hazards could have been written more concisely. This guard servitor, for example, has some pretty verbose tactics and moves. This could all have probably been tightened up and fit onto one page, which is important in the long run for GMs to prep and to reference during gameplay. Unified, intriguing aesthetic. The artwork is very pretty, in my opinion, and remarkably consistent. There's a reason why so many people have become fascinated with Sam's world-building project, and it's because there's just a mystique and a perspective to the world that draws you in. Polished mechanics. I remember being really impressed with Felix's Wild Sea system, and he has applied all of his years of playtesting and design experience to this game. The way that the tracks interact on the character sheet and do double duty in most cases is really elegant. Like I mentioned earlier, I think that tallying up the D6s for a roll can be a bit cumbersome for new players, but ultimately it's only a matter of time before that becomes second nature. Camping matters. I don't think I can recall a game where the quality of food and sleep that you get during the camping phases will determine whether or not you slowly wither away and die. To be fair, it's highly unlikely that bad sleep or food will actively kill you in this game, but you do take what is essentially primary damage to your character if you don't prioritize those things. And I think that's great game design. It directs players towards thinking about those aspects of their adventure and sort of grounds them in the harsh reality of adventuring in an endless ruins. I'm personally on the fence about whether or not I could play a campaign with exclusively chibi-looking kids, but the design and concept work for this game are undeniably extremely polished and professionally done. I glossed over it in this video, but there are a ton of resources, even just in this quick start, for composing environments, as well as a good smattering of minor spirits and demons, such that I think if the game were fully fleshed out into the 300 or 350 or more pages that they will end up doing, it will be an incredibly usable world for GMs and a nearly endless space for players to explore. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more RPG reviews, and join the channel as a member for exclusive videos. Links for everything are below. I'll see you in the next one.